What would you do if someone collapsed at your feet, bleeding, gasping, dying, and the only way to save them meant breaking every rule you'd sworn to follow? What if you acted on instinct, saved a life, and lost everything in return? What if, instead of applause, you were handed a termination letter? And what if, just 24 hours later, your phone rang, and the voice on the other end said, "Please hold for the President of the United States"? Who was the man you saved? Why did the world suddenly turn its eyes on you? And how does a nurse go from being fired to being remembered forever? Nurse got fired after saving the life of U.S. Army. 24 hours later, she got shocking presidential invite. Before we go further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this one. In the heart of St. Grace Memorial Hospital, where urgency fills the air like static, Nurse Amelia Ross glided through the chaos as if she were born for it. Monitors beeped, stretchers rolled, and voices called out over intercoms, but Amelia was a calm center in the storm. Her hands moved with practiced precision, her voice soft but firm as she comforted a young boy sobbing over a fractured arm. Gently holding his hand, she distracted him with a silly story about a superhero nurse who once saved a dinosaur with a broken tail. The boy cracked a smile through his tears, and Amelia gave him a wink as she finished applying the cast. She didn't notice the passing glances from the other nurses, glances of admiration. Not everyone in this line of work carried her fire. Amelia didn't just care. She gave everything. Her dedication wasn't born from textbooks or med school lectures. It was etched into her bones. Raised by a single mother who juggled waitressing and night school, Amelia knew what sacrifice looked like from a young age. But it was her grandmother's stories that shaped her path. A war nurse during Vietnam, her grandmother spoke with a fierce light in her eyes about battlefield tents, sleepless nights, and lives saved with bare hands and a heartbeat of faith. Those stories weren't bedtime tales. They were calls to action. Amelia answered that call early. Through underfunded nursing school, through long shifts at understaffed clinics, she rose. While others skipped holidays to take vacations, Amelia missed Christmas dinners to sit beside dying patients who had no one else. Birthdays were often spent behind latex gloves and surgical masks. Relationships? She tried, but few people understood why she could never put them first. Yet she never regretted it. Her colleagues noticed. They called her the one you want when everything goes wrong. New interns gravitated toward her for guidance. Patients remembered her name long after discharge. Still, she carried a reputation that hovered like a shadow. She broke rules. Not recklessly, but unapologetically. Amelia believed that protocol was a guide, not a god. She'd once performed CPR on a patient in the hallway rather than wait for a room to clear. Another time, she administered a life-saving dose to a child in respiratory distress before the attending had arrived. She documented everything, always transparent, but it didn't stop the administration from tightening its grip on her. Meetings were called. Notes were taken. Words like insubordination and risk floated in the air. But none of it mattered to Amelia. What mattered were the lives. As her shift rolled on, the ER hummed with routine tension. A car crash victim wheeled in. A drunk man yelled obscenities. A woman cried alone in a corner, clutching an ultrasound photo. Amelia handled each moment with seamless efficiency, as though she had a sixth sense for pain and the patience to soften it. In the break room, she barely had time to sip her lukewarm coffee when her phone buzzed. Mom. A brief message. Dinner soon? Miss you. She smiled softly, then set it aside. There was always a reason to stay just a little longer. Someone always needed her. Across the room, a TV broadcast flickered with grainy images, rows of American flags, fatigued soldiers stepping off military transport planes, family members crying as they embraced loved ones. The anchor's voice narrated. Today marks the return of the 89th Army Medical Support Unit from their final deployment. After 18 months overseas, they are home. No major incidents reported during their journey, officials say. Amelia glanced at the screen. She rarely had time for the news, but something about it made her pause. The soldiers looked so young, so tired. She thought about the scarred men and women who'd come through her ER. So many never talked about what they saw. They just came back, different. She shook it off as a trauma call came through. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of movement and voices. Through it all, Amelia remained steady. The staff around her admired her skill, her empathy, but administrators watched her like a ticking clock. She was the best nurse they had, and also the one most likely to step outside the lines. They liked her results, but not her methods. The tension was invisible, but it lived in every choice she made. When her shift neared its end, the ER finally quieted. Amelia leaned against the wall outside triage, stretching her neck, blinking the exhaustion from her eyes. She had 40 minutes before the next nurse took over. A part of her wanted to run out and see her mother, maybe surprise her. But another part, a louder, more familiar part, knew she'd stay just a bit longer, just in case. And then it happened. The automatic doors at the ER entrance swung open with a mechanical hiss, and in stepped a man in full army fatigues. His gait was steady, but his face was pale, and something in his eyes looked off. His hand clutched his side, just above his abdomen. No one screamed. No alarm sounded. But Amelia moved. She stepped forward, unaware that in less than an hour, the course of her life would split in two. That everything she had believed about duty, sacrifice, and justice would be tested. That by the time the sun rose again, she would no longer be Nurse Amelia Ross of St. Grace Memorial. She would be something else entirely. But for now, she was exactly who she had always been. The woman who chose the life that most people run from. The one who didn't wait for permission to save a life. The one who would risk everything, again. And the world? The world was about to notice. The lobby of St. Grace Memorial was unusually quiet that afternoon. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, warming the polished floor tiles. Visitors murmured, nurses typed notes behind the front desk, and for a moment, everything was routine. Then the door opened and chaos walked in. A U.S. Army sergeant, his face pale, staggered forward. One hand clutched his side where a dark stain was quickly spreading across his fatigues. For a split second, no one moved. Then, with a sharp gasp, he collapsed. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed like a gunshot. People screamed. A receptionist knocked over a chair scrambling for help. Several nurses rushed forward, then halted, uncertain, waiting for orders. Blood spilled fast, a growing pool beneath the soldier. He wasn't breathing. Amelia saw it unfold from just a few feet away. She didn't wait. She sprinted across the lobby, dropped to her knees beside him, and took charge. Her hands trembled only slightly as she checked his pulse. Barely there. His throat was obstructed, his chest rising shallow and slow. There was no time. She ripped open his shirt with urgent hands, her eyes already scanning for tools. None of the trauma cards had arrived. She reached into her scrub pocket, pulled out a pin, dismantled it in seconds. Beside her, an 4-bag lay abandoned from a nurse who had panicked. Amelia grabbed the tubing. A makeshift airway was formed. Every second felt like a battle cry in her ears. Sweat beaded on her forehead. She plunged the tube into a precise spot just above the collarbone and blew air into his lungs. A gurgle, a spasm. The soldier coughed violently, and then sucked in a breath. Gasps erupted around the room, not from the patient, but from staff. Some looked horrified, others stunned. The trauma team finally arrived, wheeling in crash equipment. A doctor knelt beside her, checking vitals. "What did you do?" he asked, but Amelia didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the soldier, now conscious but dazed, blinking at the ceiling like someone waking from death itself. The chaos slowly quieted, replaced by tension. Later, as the soldier was wheeled away for full care, Amelia stood up, hands bloodied, chest heaving. A few nurses nodded with subtle respect, but no one spoke. The silence was thick. She didn't need praise. She never had. Saving him was enough. Or so she thought. 10 minutes later, she was summoned upstairs. The office was cold. A superior sat behind a desk, lips pressed into a line. The words came quickly, emotionless. "You performed an invasive procedure without authorization. Outside the trauma unit. That is a direct violation of protocol." Amelia didn't flinch. "He would have died," she said simply. "That's not the point." But to her, it was the only point. No recognition. No gratitude. Just a paper trail waiting to swallow her whole. She left the office not in tears, but with a strange stillness. The hallway felt longer than usual. Faces avoided hers. No one mentioned the soldier. By the end of her shift, the letter arrived. Termination. Effective immediately. She sat on the edge of her locker bench, the letter in her lap, blood still dried on her sleeves. Hours ago, she had brought a man back from the edge of death. Now, she had lost everything she'd built. Not for failure, but for doing exactly what she was trained to do. save a life. And the system punished her for it. She left the hospital under fluorescent lights that had seen 1,000 emergencies, but none quite like this. Outside, the world continued. But inside Amelia, something had changed. Not broken or hardened. The rules had buried her, but not her courage. Not yet. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. A silence that pressed in like a weight, suffocating and thick. Amelia sat on the edge of her couch, back straight, letter clutched in one hand. The room was dim except for the amber glow from the street lamps outside, filtering through the blinds and broken lines. Her uniform lay crumpled beside her, blood-stained sleeves half hidden under the shadows. The day's events clung to her like static. She read the letter again. Every word felt like a slap. Termination effective immediately. Breach of policy. Unauthorized procedure. Not a single mention of the soldier's life she saved. No thanks. No grace. Just cold ink on hospital letterhead. Her phone buzzed. She didn't move. Doubt trickled in first. Then the anger followed, curling hot beneath her skin. She had done what no one else dared. She'd acted when others froze. And this was her reward, cast out like a liability. Not even the dignity of a conversation. Just paper and silence. She leaned back, her head against the couch cushion, eyes unfocused. Her thoughts drifted, uninvited, to the faces of past patients. The elderly man who'd held her hand after surgery. The little girl who'd brought her a drawing after being discharged. The young mother who'd cried into her shoulder after learning her child would survive. Those moments had once kept her going. Now they felt like ghosts. She opened her laptop and searched for jobs. Nursing agencies. Clinics. Private care. Her inbox filled with auto-replies. Thank you for your interest. Unfortunately, she saw it in their eyes during quick phone interviews. They already knew. Word had spread. Reckless. Unstable. A liability. By evening, her mother called. Amelia let it ring, then answered on the second try. Honey, talk to me. I'm fine. No, you're not. She wanted to scream. To cry. To crumble. But her voice stayed even. They fired me for saving him, Mom. I know, her mother said gently. And I'm proud of you. Pride wasn't enough to pay rent. Or erase the sting of betrayal. I don't know what to do now, Amelia whispered. There was no answer. Just silence and breathing. After they hung up, she sat motionless, staring at the city blinking beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, people were laughing, living, moving forward. And she was stuck, drowning in stillness. She didn't know that, miles away, in a sterile military hospital, the soldier she had saved was waking up. Tubes trailed from his arms. Bandages covered his chest. A nurse asked him who to contact. His lips cracked open and whispered one name. Amelia. Elsewhere, a phone rang. A file was opened. Classified. Red letter stamped. The soldier wasn't just any soldier. He was someone important. Very important. And someone had questions. Quiet ones. Urgent ones. Amelia, however, knew none of this. She curled up on the couch, exhaustion finally dragging her down. Her hand still clutched the termination letter. Her uniform lay where it had fallen. Just after midnight, her phone rang again. She stirred, blinking groggily. Unknown number. Probably another rejection. She answered, her voice hoarse. Hello. A pause. Then a calm, deliberate voice. Please hold for the President of the United States. Her breath caught. Silence stretched, electric. The screen faded to black. Morning light crept through the blinds, casting pale gold across Amelia's living room. She hadn't moved from the couch. Still in jeans and a hoodie, she sat hunched forward, her phone resting on her knee, screen dim. Her fingers hadn't let go since the call came in. Not even when the voice on the other end had said those impossible words. Please hold for the President of the United States. The line had shifted, and then a calmer, more official tone introduced himself as a senior aide. The message was clear, direct, unbelievable. The soldier she saved was no ordinary patient. He was the President's godson. Her actions, swift and unorthodox, had been reviewed. By the military, by medical advisors, by the President himself. The result? An invitation. Not just to the White House, but to be honored publicly, nationally. Even as the aide's voice faded, Amelia hadn't responded. She sat there, phone pressed to her ear, caught in the strange quiet that follows seismic news. Her heart beat slowly, heavily, as if trying to match the gravity of what she had just heard. The next hours were a blur. She changed. She packed. She called her mother, whose tearful disbelief mirrored her own. When the black car arrived outside her apartment, the street fell silent. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A driver stepped out, crisp suit, earpiece, calm professionalism. "Miss Ross." She nodded, climbing in, barely breathing. As the city blurred past the window, her name hit the headlines. Fired nurse saves president's godson. Blogs lit up. News anchors speculated. Social media erupted. Some praised her bravery. Others questioned the hospital's decision. The world that once ignored her had suddenly turned its full gaze her way. The car pulled through White House security, and for the first time, Amelia stepped into a world she'd only ever seen on screens. Inside, it felt surreal. Polished marble floors. Staff in pressed uniforms. Aides guiding her gently, speaking with respect. Every hallway felt larger than life. She moved in a quiet daze through the corridors, trying to steady her breath. Finally, they led her to the East Room. It was grand, but not intimidating. Soft light spilled from chandeliers. Seats were arranged in neat rows. Reporters lined the back, their lenses clicking. Military officials filled the front. And then, silence. All heads turned as the president entered. He didn't walk with fanfare. No pageantry, just purpose. He crossed the room, stopped in front of Amelia, and reached for her hand. She stood frozen as he looked her in the eye. Not as a politician, but as a man deeply grateful. "You didn't just save a soldier," he said. "You saved family." The room held its breath. He turned to the audience. His words were simple, powerful. "We talk about courage like it's something found in battlefields. But sometimes it walks hospital corridors. Sometimes it's a nurse who doesn't wait for permission to save a life." Applause followed, sincere, thunderous. Amelia didn't cry. Not then. Not until the president handed her a certificate, not just of recognition, but of appointment. She was being invited to help lead a new federal initiative, one that would protect frontline workers, reform emergency protocols, and shield whistleblowers from retaliation. Her voice, once dismissed, was now being given a national platform. And for the first time in days, Amelia smiled. Not because she was honored, but because someone had finally listened. The halls of St. Grace Memorial looked the same, polished floors, familiar corners, the scent of antiseptic still lingering in the air. But something had changed. Near the entrance to the emergency department, a bronze plaque gleamed under soft lighting. It read, "In honor of Nurse Amelia Ross, courage above protocol." Patients passed it without pause, unaware of the weight behind those words. Staff, however, couldn't ignore it. Some paused, some nodded. A few simply stood in front of it, lost in thought. Amelia never asked for that plaque. She didn't return for recognition. In fact, she didn't return to work at St. Grace at all. Instead, she chose a different path. She stood now in front of a group of young medical students, her posture steady, her voice calm but compelling. The classroom was quiet, every eye fixed on her. On the board behind her were no diagrams or formulas, just one phrase: "In a moment of crisis, what matters more, policy or a pulse?" Her story wasn't a tale of rebellion. It was about responsibility, about making the right call when time doesn't wait. She spoke of instinct, training, judgment, and the cost of doing what's right in a system that doesn't always reward it. These students didn't just hear a lesson, they witnessed a life transformed by one decision. And more than anything, they saw what it meant to lead with heart. Amelia's days were no longer spent in hospital shifts, but in lecture halls, veteran centers, and national health conferences. She walked through military hospitals, meeting soldiers who saluted her not for rank, but for what she did when one of their own lay dying. She coached young trauma nurses on battlefield improvisation. She advised policymakers on reforms that bridged gaps between protocol and practice. Her name had made headlines, but it was the change she ignited that mattered. The very hospital that dismissed her now referenced her story during orientation. Administrators once uncomfortable with her defiance now quoted her when advocating for faster emergency authorization processes. Colleagues who once questioned her actions approached her quietly, thanking her for what she showed them. Not just about medicine, but about courage. One evening, during a televised national address, the president's voice echoed over the screen. The topic was healthcare heroes. But his words didn't list statistics or policies. They say rules save lives. And they do. But sometimes, it's the one who breaks the rules, because they see a soul fading and act before it's too late, who reminds us what healing truly means. A photo of Amelia flashed across the screen, not in scrubs or a podium, but mid-laugh beside a recovering soldier. Back at her apartment, she watched quietly, expression unreadable. Her phone buzzed again. Another invite. Another keynote. Another student asking for guidance. She didn't seek fame. She didn't rehearse speeches. She just kept showing up, truthful, grounded, unshakable. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you are watching from, and drop your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Nurse Amelia Ross's bravery? Were you moved by the moment the president called her after she saved his godson's life? Should the hospital have treated her differently? Tell us how you felt watching Amelia rise from rejection to national honor. And if this story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who believes in doing what's right, no matter the cost.